So tools you'll need for this job. Obviously you're going to want some basic hand tools. Now some more specific tools you'll need. There I have a magnet on a pair of vice grips. That's going to be to take the shims out. Next you're going to need some feeler gauges. You're going to want a block of wood in order to unseat the valve covers. You're going to want a magnet. Now that's just going to be for getting the spark plugs in and out. Next you're going to want a precision measurement tool that can measure in metric. Now that can either be a digital caliper or a micrometer. So the first thing we're going to have to do is remove the seat and the fuel tank. Start removing the seat. Just one bolt in the back to hold it on. And you can grab the seat, slide it back. To begin removing the fuel tank, we're over to the left side of the bike. Now this motorcycle uses a vacuum to draw fuel, so you do not have to drain the gas tank in order to remove it. We're going to be removing the fuel line and we're going to be removing this vacuum tube. Now some fuel will come out, but it shouldn't be a whole lot. Next we have to remove the speedometer assembly. There's just one bolt here holding it on. Beneath the speedometer assembly, you're going to unscrew your speedometer. At the end of the speedometer cable, you can see that there's a pin that goes up into your speedometer. Next, you're going to want to disconnect the two electrical connections. You simply push down on the clip at the top and pull the connector apart. We are on the right side of the bike under the fuel tank. And there are two vent hoses here going into the fuel tank. We're going to want to remove those two hoses. So those tubes were quite hard to get off. They've probably been on the bike since new, so probably about 15 years. I found that using a large pick helped. The final step in removing the fuel tank is to remove the bolt holding it down, which is this one, and there's one right in here. And the tank should lift right off. So these vent tubes were clipped to the bottom of the tank, which I forgot about. So the petcock does come off with the tank. I'm just laying the tank on some wood so it's not resting directly on the petcock. So next thing we're going to do is remove the spark plugs. They're at the front of the bike here. I'm just going to pull the boot right off. I'm actually going to remove this coil to give us a little more room to work with. There's one nut hiding under this clip, which just bends out of the way, and there's another nut hiding right there. So because this is quite a tight space, I'm actually going to put the socket down the hole first. I'm going to use a flexible magnet tool to do so before using the extension. That's what my spark plug looks like. I don't think it needs change, but I'm probably going to change them anyway because it's quite a job to get at them. We're at the rear of the bike now. Looks like this side might give us a little more room to work with. That's the boot there hiding right behind that tube. Pull that right out. So I'm having trouble finding enough slack on the spark plug wire to remove the boot. So I'm going to try removing the choke switch and seeing if that gives us some room. That was a little bit better. We're on the left side of the bike again, and we have two vent hoses going into the valve covers here and here to remove. Next, we're going to go ahead and remove the 3 balls off of both valve covers. Now with any luck, the valve cover should come right off. So I'm just using a block of wood and some hammer to knock the valve covers free. Having a bit of trouble finding the clearance to remove the cover from between the engine and the frame. The manual simply says to remove everything in between the cover and the frame in order to slide it out. So I'm going to try that. I'm going to try cutting off the zip tie here to get the wiring harness out from under the frame a little more, see if we can get some room there. that was definitely a pain, but it's out. Now for the second one. In order to get enough clearance to get the cover off, I'm going to go ahead and remove the intake. Let's go ahead and start with the air filter. There's 2 bolts in here holding it in. There's 2 bolts up top. There's number 2. And finally, the last thing we have to do for disassembly is remove this cover off the left side of the engine. Well, it's finally time to check the valves. So, what we have down here, that right there, you place a socket and a ratchet on in order to spin the engine. We're going to be spinning it counterclockwise, and we're trying to reach top dead center. If you look on this side, and right there you can see an F. So this is the front cylinder, and you can see a line that comes across the cam gear right here. Now what we want to do is looking straight down the top of the cylinder. We want to get that line perfectly level with the cylinder, and that will be our top dead center. And there we have it, perfectly in line. So the valves closer to your carburetor is going to be the intake side, and the valves further from your carburetor are going to be your exhaust side. Now the spec for the intake side is 0.1 to 0.15 millimeter, and the spec for the exhaust side is 0.2 to 0.25 millimeter. So let's go ahead and get our feel gauges and see what they're at. So this is my 0.1 feeler gauge. As you can see, it's very, very tight. It will just start to slip in, but then it will catch and it won't go in. However, if we try a 0.05 millimeter, so this is half the size, it will go in there nicely. So the clearance here is just a bit too tight. So we'll have to change that shim out for a slightly smaller shim. And it's the same story with the second intake valve. This is my 0.2 millimeter feeler gauge for the exhaust side. As we can see, it's just too big to fit in there. Now if we try a 0.178 millimeter, still just a bit too big to fit in there. Same story with the second one. So if we go all the way down to 0.127 millimeter, that one fits. And same with the second one. So all of these valves are tight. So we're going to have to change the shims on all of these valves. Now in order to remove a shim, all you have to do, slide the rocker arms to the rear, take a magnet, I have a magnet on a vice grip, and you pick up the shim just like that. There's the shim. Now there are a couple different tools you can use to measure the thickness of the shim. It has to be a very precise measurement. One option would be a micrometer. Another option, the one I'm going to use, would be a digital caliper. So let's go ahead and measure the shim. We're going to make sure our caliper is zeroed, and that's perfect. We're going to take our shim, very carefully put it in the caliper, tighten it down. So we have a 2.39 millimeter shim, which would be a 2.4 millimeter shim. So what I would try is take a slightly smaller shim, let's say a 2.35 millimeter shim, and I would install it, and I would check the measurement again. If the measurement is still too tight, then do it again with a smaller shim. And that really is all there is to it. Now I don't have any shims for this bike right now. I'm going to have to go ahead and order some. But for now I'm going to go ahead and reinstall this shim. It's just as simple as that. Now once you have all the shims installed, I would go ahead and cycle the engine a few times just by hand, and then I'd go ahead and recheck everything. If everything is great, then you're done. Reassemble, and if you need to make some more adjustments, then I would go ahead and make those adjustments. So make sure when you do the second cylinder, you're lined up with the R in the view hole, and you realign your second cylinder with top dead center. That's all I have for you for now. Reassembly would just be the reverse of the disassembly. Now this maintenance, according to the maintenance schedule, is supposed to be done every 10,000 kilometers or 6,000 miles. Now I live in Canada, and as this is a fairly large job, I'm probably going to try to do this once a year, once every winter. So it's probably going to be around 20,000 kilometers. I imagine I can get away with that. I suspect most people who own this bike don't do this maintenance very often. All the torque specs you'll need for reassembly will be at the end of the video.